Welcome, everyone. I have, this is Doug Maiden from Beck Technology, and I have Dave Bartolai from James McHugh in Chicago. He's the Vice President of Preconstruction, and I've got some questions I'd like to chat with him about because James McHugh is a unique opportunity for us because they're an Excel shop, and so I imagine there's several folks out there that might be interested in how Dave was going through the process of first of all, evaluating Beck Technology's DESTINI Estimator, and then ultimately making that choice to go from Excel into a full-blown estimating package. And so, Dave, a little bit about your background is that I believe you had been exposed to other estimating systems prior to coming to James McHugh. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So I've been in the industry for about 18 years and had various stints at different larger GC and CM firms in the Chicagoland area. So in my past experience, we worked with products like WinEst and Timberline, some of the other database systems, and coming over to McHugh at the time, did not realize that for a very well-established firm with the volume that we do, somewhere in the range of $500 to $700 million a year, from a building estimating side, we still were working with Excel. So it was, part of our strategy as I came on board 3.5 years ago was to do a heavy evaluation of different products out there and try to figure out which product would really lead us in the correct direction for the long term as we move on to a database-driven system.
So why was it important to embrace new technology or kind of go down this road? Was it just one of these things where, sure, the status quo is fine, but what was really driving that move to look at other things?
Yeah, I mean, there's several factors in there, Doug, and as we talked about as we were going through the evaluation process with you, probably a challenge that all of the firms are faced with on a day-to-day basis is we're asked to do more, so provide a higher volume of estimates, provide more information with our estimates, do all of that with higher accuracy and being allowed less time or resources to be able to complete those types of estimating or budgeting activities. So from that standpoint, there's only so much you can do with people. You can either throw people at it or you can try to find technology as a go-between. And so that's where we saw that there's an opportunity here in some of the technology, and we needed to go out and evaluate that. Further, I think just with the right technology, there are insights and loads of data that we can gather that aren't readily available maybe in more traditional solutions. There are products that maybe find ways to kind of piece this together, but from an estimating standpoint, it makes sense to have a product that presents you all that data in one in-house product. So we looked at, again, what is a good technology solution from a cost planning and historical cost standpoint that would allow us to have access to that information and use that to evaluate future decisions or be able to respond quickly. And then, again, there's a certain aspect to this as well from a sales standpoint that, right, wrong, or indifferent, there is a market perception amongst owners or different clients, architects, sub-partners that we're working with as to who are the more advanced firms out there. So, you go into an owner presentation and you say you're on an Excel type database system. Not that it's wrong or incorrect or that it doesn't work, but there is a sales aspect to being able to, show integrated 2D, 3D takeoffs and comparisons within a software package. So there is that part of it as well that's, a perception standpoint. And so that was another factor that we looked at as we went through the evaluation process.
Fantastic. Well, we're really pleased to have you guys as a partner, and it's been a real pleasure to work with you and your team. Could you tell us or share some of the common obstacles that you ran into during the implementation process, specifically because you were moving from an Excel-based platform to a database-driven platform?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So again, I think any firm that chooses to make a major switch in software or process, we all live with the reality that change is hard. We have day jobs, we have deadlines that we have to meet. So that doesn't change. And so one was just physically, allocating resources to that process and making sure that we had a plan going into it and that our team was aware of what the changeover involved. The second thing was, we started to really think, we like to say that, good software is the right tool in the tool belt, but it doesn't solve your issues for process. And we quickly realized that as we started, even with our implementation team, talking about what some of the changes would entail going from an Excel-based system to a process that included a database-driven solution, that if people aren't familiar with a new process, you can train them all you want on the software, but if they don't understand the process that goes behind it, then you're going to have that challenge. So we started, actually, even though we were still in the early stages of implementation and starting to work through some of the specifics of what that transition to the software would be, we started making some changes just in our estimating process, shifting some of the responsibilities between senior estimators and individual trade estimators to align more with what the process would look like under estimator. And then again, just specific to working your way from an Excel-based system to something that has a database backup to it, we saw a few things in there, obviously, that are just specific to that transition. So historically, we used a typical budget template that was we would consider it a light uniformat breakdown. We didn't have multiple levels of work breakdown for uniformat or CSI or master format. So creating a database of conditions that were going to support us in a database system meant we had to really go back and think through what that work breakdown structure looked like. And then similarly, again, when you're in an Excel-based system, we have our trade estimators tracking a bunch of typical conditions, but we didn't have a standardized or centralized database of cost conditions necessarily. It resided in multiple different locations. So all of that data had to be collected and pulled back to a central location. We liked the fact that Excel historically was very flexible. That change, there's a change in philosophy that goes along with that when you have the constraints of a software product, and so you try to find a product that best mimics that, but there are going to be some of those changeovers. So again, we just had to condition our people and start training them and giving them a perspective of what just the whole process would look like within a database system versus Excel, where you could just add a row, add a column, however you wanted to. There might be some different steps that were involved in the database system. And then the other part that we really spent some time thinking about is in our implementation plan was setting up a staged approach to how we wanted to really roll out the system. There's a lot of power, in DESTINI Estimator with comparisons and, being able to do breakdowns on different levels and having integrated 2D and 3D takeoff. But we said, what is it that we really want to focus on? And so we tried to really make sure that we didn't get distracted from all the different features that we eventually intend to use and roll out, but really try to focus on what the primary goal was, which was moving from Excel to a database-driven system so that we could get comfortable there and then move forward into enhancing our full use and functionality of the program.
Excellent. Well, as you know, we take great pride in partnering with you, and I'm kind of curious about our implementation process. What was really helpful in partnering with you for the entire McHugh team?
Again, I touched on, and first and foremost, Beck has been a fantastic partner throughout the process. During evaluation, part of our evaluation process as we were trying to pick the right partner was evaluating capabilities. And the few things that we really liked about the teaming with Beck was the system, Beck Technology being its own company, but being backed up or originally being developed as a service to a GC/CM firm, meant that with internal to the organization, you guys had a history of servicing a general contractor and understanding the needs of contractors on a day-to-day basis. So the product was designed and continues to be redesigned and upgraded with the idea of how does it service the day-to-day process of a general contractor or construction management firm. And I think that showed throughout the implementation process, because we have, again, as we touched on, we have limited resources on a day-to-day basis within our group. We, for the volume that we estimate on a day-to-day basis, we run with 3 senior estimators and 7 trade estimators, which is a relatively small group for the volume of estimates that we usually churn out in a year. We're looking at probably estimating wise over $1 billion of work in any given year with different levels of budgeting and bids. So we're turning that around with a fairly lean group. Having a partner like Beck really aided us because your team, Doug, between yourself and Julio, Steven, and Mo Black, you guys were able to help us with obstacles, identify obstacles in advance of us running up against them. Just your experience with other implementations and other firms, we were going ahead and saying you may want to consider options A, B, C, because in past implementations we've seen similar hurdles. You guys spent a lot of time coming into the implementation really trying to understand our process so that you could make those recommendations and apply that past history from your side as to how we could potentially alleviate some of those issues or things that we should just be aware of. And again, it's been a pleasure in the sense that on a day-to-day basis, you guys help us and have helped us as we continue to move forward with the implementation, checking off little, tasks here and there to make sure that we stay on course with our overall implementation. So, I mean, some of the things that I wanted to call out specifically as we talked about this was, again, we were starting where we didn't really have a database history to work from. So, being able to run by you guys and your team making recommendations on formatting and how we want to even just number our conditions, how we want to, identify our work breakdown structure, where we need to add categories in order to achieve our overall goals. One of the bigger challenges that we ran up against was, again, I mentioned our typical Excel budget form was this 9-category breakdown. And because we liked the idea for a firm that has worked in Excel, when we evaluated back in the strong Excel integration going backwards, we liked the idea of having a dashboard that would match our typical 9-category breakdown structure. I think, Doug, you could admit that finding a way to push data back from the estimator software platform back into that dashboard, you've probably learned a bunch of things alongside us as to what those challenges look like, because it's a complicated form where we try to break down not only by our modified uniformat structure, but we also like to show breakdowns by area of work, whether we're looking at a mixed-use building that has some residential apartments and retail and parking or office. We break those costs into those separate buckets as well. And the program is set up with work breakdown to really support that, but getting that data back into an Excel format that's usable, that's been it's been a process working through with you guys, and you have really carried the lion's share of that work in trying to write the formulas and make sure that the data are appropriately populates back from the database system. And then just testing dashboards and pilot data. Again, the team has gone above and beyond with multiple trainings and just working on a flexible implementation schedule that works with our time frames, and it's really made it a lot easier and streamlined for us to move forward with the process.
It's been exciting, and I've really enjoyed it. I have to admit, as you talked about how lean you guys are, one thing that many that are on this call may not recognize is that you pursue both public and private work, and that's two different sides of the coin that really require a lot of expertise in both fashions. And so it's really been exciting to see how you've been able to adopt the technology and integrate it in. Looking back, is there anything that you would do differently, or what would you do differently if you had it all over to do again?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things, and I talked a little bit about our process changing over. So as we planned with the Beck team to conduct intermittent trainings, we were trying to pick certain milestone dates when we thought it would be appropriate to integrate the training into the implementation process. And I think one of the things that I would go back and change now, if we could do it over again, is I probably would have waited a little bit longer for the first training. I would have spent a little bit more time with our implementation team up front, getting the nuts and bolts in place, making sure that the database was finalized, making sure that we were a little bit further along with reporting, and frankly, maybe spending a little bit more time with some pilot projects and implementation prior to conducting the first training. We did a first training. We started the implementation process, I believe, last April formally, and we had our first training, I want to say, in July or August. And so from a time frame standpoint, when you're collecting all that data and really moving forward, we weren't far enough along with that process on the back end. So what ended up happening is we wanted to do it to share the excitement that we had as a group with the rest of the team of, here's this product that we're going to be implementing and how it's going to change the process and it should facilitate and help us. But we went through the training and then we weren't immediately following that with some sort of day-to-day usage or full pilot project usage because we were still working on the back end details. And so when we got around to training number 2, which was at the end of last year, we pretty much everything that the group had gone through the initial training had been lost. They had forgotten it, or it took a little bit of a refresher to get back up to speed. So I think with that in mind, I probably would have delayed doing the training the first time around. Similarly, I think one of the big things is in our implementation plan, we talked about a couple of Excel-based dashboards in order to try to gain the benefit of the Excel functionality within that comes out of the Beck system. So again, transitioning for the folks that have been with our firm for a long time that are used to seeing data in an Excel format, the program, the Estimator program, has great functionality for bringing that data back out. We thought there was a function, part of, as Doug touched on, we do a lot of public type work, and frankly, in the city of Chicago, there's a lot more compliance requirements that are being applied that require M&W tracking during participation tracking during both public and private type projects nowadays. And so we worked with Doug to create a dashboard that would allow us to do some of that tracking. But it was, at the end of the day, we still plan on using it. We plan on finishing that exercise, but we've ended up shelving that a little bit while we focus on getting our baseline implementation done. So we probably challenged the Beck team with starting to spend some time looking at that earlier in the process than we should have. So I'd probably, if I were to go back, I would say we probably would have focused more again on getting our baseline dashboard, baseline reports settled earlier on in the process, focus on that before we start working on some of the supplemental functions. And then again, I think for anybody that's implementing a new product out there, you probably can't have enough pilot projects or test runs to make sure that you're comfortable with that the software outputs the way that you want to. So again, I think we would spend we continue to do it now, but spend more time in piloting specific sample projects or new projects as we were to go along through the implementation.
Excellent. Well, I have to admit that M&W dashboard really was an exciting one. I think it's the most complicated dashboard I ever worked on, and I've learned a lot from you and that team and that experience. I as you were talking about kind of getting things in order, have you been able to do much 3D takeoff? We had a couple of questions that just popped up here about people asking about 3D models. Have you been able to get to that yet, or is it just not prime time as far as like architects not providing the quality of models that you're looking for?
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges that we see. I mean, we're headed there. We've demoed some of that 3D functionality and training, but it really takes, from our standpoint, there's a dedicated resource that has to go along with our estimating group. So we have a VDC group that spends their time supporting both our pre-construction efforts and our day-to-day in the field construction teams with modeling and BIM coordination and whatnot. And so the types of products that we work on, which is a lot of vertical residential, the architecture teams that we're dealing with are not typically providing detailed models that would provide that full level or where we think the useful functionality of 3D modeling at this point. Not that they're not headed there and not that we won't start to see that, but there's probably some enhancements in our process and having the right resources to condition models that we get from architects to make sure that the data that would come out of any model that's provided by the architect is actually useful and aligns with our estimating process. And so that's a longer term goal for us, but it's not something that we've really kicked the wheels on to date so far. Like I said, we've just done some sampling of what the capabilities are, but we haven't done an enhanced, say, 3D survey of a building product yet.
Okay. And then I have one final question here that popped up as well. Is have you do you integrate with your accounting system? Do you use DESTINI Estimator and somehow pass data over to accounting, or is that not on the radar yet?
No, it is part of, as we finalize the database and the work breakdown structure, it is something that we are adding into our database. So we use Viewpoint for our accounting software. And obviously the company has a standardized phase coding system for our projects. Not that things aren't customizable, but that that's our standard that we start from on each project. And so we are adding a baseline phase code assignment to each of our database estimating conditions as a starting point. From our feedback with our internal project management teams, when we give them an Excel template in our current process, that is one thing that takes some additional time for them as they go through, and while a lot of the spec section or cost code items as they show up in our current estimates align with our phase codes, there's not 100% alignment. And so having a preset work breakdown that would align with our accounting software, we think that that's going to help save time when we do transition from estimating to our field team and we're proceeding on a project to allow them to do their budget setups faster.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight with everyone. And I look forward to talking to you again soon and seeing your team in just a little bit, hopefully when it's a little bit warmer in Chicago.
Thanks, Doug. We appreciate it, and it's been a great experience for our team as we've moved through implementation. We're excited to get full usage starting up here in the next few months.
Excellent. You take care.
Thank you all.